Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. It's been 2 weeks since we've been here on the podcast with Loretta, but of course, we are always excited. Thanks for waiting with us as she was out doing her travels, and I was out training and racing. So we both have a pretty colorful past couple weeks here. So the next big race that's coming up for a lot of us called Kettle. A lot of us are running the 50K, the 100K, the 100 mile, or maybe you're doing the fun run, but we're going to kind of dive into what the race is going to demand, what you can do in training, as well as how you can prepare your mind for the toll that's gonna come at us here in a couple weeks. Loretta, what's new?
So I just got back from a trip to Boulder and had an amazing time. The mountains are beautiful.
Wonderful. And you were just telling me how you had a great experience at altitude and how doing a little hiking and running on Magnolia Road, you come back to sea level and everything feels so nice, right?
Oh, it does. I mean, I was running on Magnolia Road at like around 8,800 feet elevation. Felt like I was so out of shape and couldn't breathe, and came home and ran intervals yesterday, and I felt like I was floating. I'm like, oh, it's so much easier to breathe in Michigan.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think too, that's why I really like the idea of somebody's doing like a mountainous race and you live on flatland, to go out and at least experience the altitude just to see what it makes your body feel like. Because I know for me, there's this decoupling of like, how hard is my heart racing? And then how hard am I breathing? Because I think you and I had different experiences. I experienced that like, hey, I wasn't breathing that hard at altitude when I was running Wasatch, but my heart was pounding. So you kind of get these weird mixed signals of like, okay, how hard am I actually working?
Right.
And I think you were
Definitely.
saying that your breathing was really hard, but your heart rate wasn't going too high,
It was
right?
interesting. On climbs, when we did a lot of hikes, we all were kind of comparing our heart rates, and our heart rates were quite high, quite early, just, walking. But then when I did the run, my heart rate really wasn't that high. It was just, I felt like I couldn't breathe at that point. So it just seemed to take me a little while. Once I sort of warmed up and adjusted, then I seemed to be a little bit better towards the end of the run. I mean, I just ran 5 miles, but yeah, it was interesting.
Wonderful. I'm glad you had a great time. You saw some wildlife too, bald eagles, moose, the whole deal,
Yes,
right?
yes. It was so cool. Yep, we got the whole experience.
Wonderful. I think everybody should get out to the mountains just to,
Yes.
like put their fitness to good adventure. So a lot of us, out here in the flatlands, we can build up a good amount of fitness, and then it's really cool to just go out to a cool place and then like express it and have it take us through like, cool environments that we're not used to. Because I know like the spatial perception of when you're up on top of a mountain looking at the world around you, it's just such a small and humbling feeling. And I think more humans than not can benefit from being humbled a little bit.
For sure. For sure.
Wonderful. Well, just to tease this, we are going to be answering some listener questions. One of them is, how do you prevent dropping at 100K when running the 100 mile? For those of you not familiar with the course, you start at Nordic, you run an out and back north, and you come back to Nordic, and that's going to be about 100K. And then you have to leave Nordic, leave your car, leave the party that's going on, and go another 20 miles south to come 20 miles back north to finish out the 100 miler. So that can be a cruxy moment for people mentally, because you put in a long, hard day, but there's still a lot more work to get done. So we're going to answer that one. We also have another question. What type of shoes are going to be best for this race? So I think that will be kind of unveiled as we talk more about the course. But let's get right into it. Speaking of Nordic here, that's probably that's either the most loved or the most hated section for most people, honestly. I don't know if you've heard anything, if you've coached any of your athletes through Kettle 100, Loretta, but usually that's the section people either are like, I love it on the way out, but then on the way back, it absolutely sucks. And I guess my experience is that first section where you're running kind of counterclockwise to get onto the Ice Age trail, there's just a lot of punchy climbs that are super fun when you first start. So it's a really easy way to kind of take your legs out, because it's like you're fresh, you're tapered, cruising down the hills. It feels great. The scenery is kind of cool. There's some flatter prairie, like grassy sections where you can start to, like form into your packs and get to know your competitors and, start to talk with people. But that one's one where, man, when you come back in, the first time after doing the out and back, you come back and you hit those hills again and you realize, oh, the start. So for me personally, when I ran it last year, like that's what I noticed is, I think I was running with I was running with a couple people, a couple packs, and it was fun. We were talking about the day, we were talking about our training. There was some silence, and everybody's just having a good time cruising. But man, if you take that out too hard, it can really spell disaster for the rest of your race. How do you coach athletes through 100 miles and starting easy in order to keep pace in the back half?
Right. And that, that's tricky. And that's, a conversation they have to have with some people more than others that are going to tend to go out too fast, when it goes. And so we do talk a lot about, we look through pacing charts and we talk about, what ideally is a reasonable finish time, and then kind of, think it through from there, talking about how much time is it going to take at aid, so you can kind of figure out what is your overall time going to be. Because if you're looking for a certain overall time, let's say you're going for a 20-hour, you have to remember that there's going to be stop time for aid stations, right? So when you're building that, thinking about that, and then, really talking about, you want to start out so you feel comfortable. It's like an easy pace that you can just keep moving your legs all day long and not exerting too much effort too early, because it could hurt you later in the game. So, each athlete is different, I think. So really looking at how are they going to approach the race, depending on what paces that they're aiming for. Are there going to be parts where they're going to be power hiking, or are they going to go on a certain time base of where they're going to, do some power hiking. Usually in a race like Kettle, it would be more on the hills is what I would advise my athletes to do, is to power hike the hills, use as little effort as you can getting up, and maintain on the downhills and the flats. So that's the way I kind of go about it.
And oftentimes too, like, especially if you're running your first 100-miler, like that easy pace is way easier than you think it's going to be.
Yes.
Because of course, when you're tapered, when you're fresh, when you're ready to go, maybe you have a coffee in your system or whatever, you're kind of buzzing at the start line, you feel the excitement. You're going to want to go and click into your typical easy pace on a flat, 20-mile long run. And it's like, that's not even going to be slow enough for, for 100 miles for sure. Because a lot of times the strain on the body isn't necessarily on the ability to breathe, your VO2 max, your lactate threshold, any of that. The strain on the body is, hey, how durable can you be, especially after 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 hours, know? So starting off easy and then staying easy is going to be your best bet. And let's just say if you have anything else to give at the end, then for sure, like, empty the tank, but it's that really interesting feeling of like, man, like, starting slow and then going slower.
Yeah.
But yeah,
if you look at Kettle, the cutoff is 30 hours. So that's an 18-minute overall average. So, kind of putting that in perspective, that tends to be more of a faster power hiking pace. So I think, thinking through some of those things and really feeling that pace, so hopefully during your training, you have done some power hiking. So you're familiar with that and you've been kind of working on a goal. I usually have my athletes focus on like an 15 to 18-minute power hike pace. So, it's a good effort, but enough to keep you under cutoff, and combined with your running that you're doing on the flats and the downhills.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic point, Loretta, is that, like, no matter how quick you think you are or how little you think you're going to be walking or hiking during the race, even for the fastest of us, it's going to happen. Like, you don't go 100 miles in this type of elevation profile without power hiking on some of the hills. So, even if it's as little as, 20 to 30 minutes a week, just getting on the stair stepper or the incline treadmill and just putting in a solid power hike just to get your body used to it, I think that's going to be huge for this course, because this course isn't going to favor somebody that can grind uphill all day. It's not going to favor somebody who can, jet downhill all day. It's going to favor somebody who can transition between, I'm running flat, I got my flat legs on, and now all of a sudden we have this 50-foot hill that punches us, like a 15% grade. And then we have a downhill that's maybe, 75 feet downhill. And then it goes flat again, but you get hit by another hill. So it's like, it's almost death by 1,000 paper cuts. There's going to be no sustained uphill. There's going to be no sustained downhill, but that transition between your uphill power hiking or your uphill running and downhill running and flat running is going to be going to be key on a course like this for sure. Because as you come out of Nordic, you know, like you're only going to hit more hills as you go to Bluff and to Horse Riders and to Natalie. I think it gets a little bit more prairie once you kind of get by McMiller, Wilton, Highway 67. And then it gets pretty punchy and hilly again up on the northern end of the loop by Scuppernong too. That's a really hilly section. So yeah, I think that's going to be the key in this like build up in this preparation, is just making sure that no matter who you are, like you've got your flatter days, you know, where you're cruising, you're clicking over your legs at a nice easy pace. You have your uphill days where you're kind of working on those short punchy hills. You know, you get your downhill legs in order. Maybe you do a couple downhill reps just to make sure that your quads are seasoned. And you also practice your power hiking, because of course we're all going to experience it at some point during the day, no matter how long we're out there for.
Right. And I think it's really important to go into a race like this, or any, you know, bigger race, like you said, knowing that there's going to be some power hiking, and to be prepared for that. So you don't feel like, know that that's what you're going to do. So you don't feel like you're failing by walking at some point in the race. It's just something that's going to happen, and be ready for it, you know, so, and it's okay. That's what's going to happen. So I think it's important.
I love that you said that, because that's so psychologically tricky for a runner, right? Like we call this ultra running, ultra marathoning. So the idea of, you know, for a lot of us, you know, doing a power hike up a hill, it's almost a little defeating. Like, man, I should be running this on any other day. I would be running this. I would be, you know, I would be jogging this, whatever it is. And that's not necessarily the case. Like, you know, the race isn't won by who runs and who hikes. The race is won by who gets from point A to point B the quickest, you know? So a lot of times if that hill's punching you hard enough, and, you know, you got the heat of the day, it's 80 degrees, the sun's beating down your back, is it better to get up that hill in 3 minutes if you're hiking as opposed to 2 minutes if you're running? I would argue that, hey, suck up the time on that hill, so that way your heart stays nice and low, you kind of save your legs, and then you can transition the downhill a little bit more smooth, and then you're not super taxed by the time you get to the flats. You know,
Right.
maybe you take that uphill with a little bit more strategy, where you're not thinking like, oh man, I'm just kicking tire, kicking can up this hill, but like, hey, maybe you're going a little bit slower, but that allows you to get some calories in, that allows you to, you know, take in some hydration. Maybe it allows you to assess like, hey, what's hurting on me? What's not hurting on me? Do I have any trash that I need to throw away at the next aid station? Kind of go through some of these checklists while your mental energy isn't taken up by trying not to trip over that, you know, that root or that chute that's in the middle of the trail.
Another thing I like to talk about when we're talking about pace and racing strategy for an event like this is thinking about, once we kind of have an idea of what the weather is going to be, you might need to use that piece, right? So if it's going to really heat up, a couple of years ago, it was a super hot day, you know, you just don't know what you're going to get. And so if it's cool at the beginning, you might want to think about pacing a little bit faster. I'm not talking a lot, 10, 15 seconds, a mile faster. And then as the heat of the day goes on, you're going to be able to account for that natural slowdown, because you're going to be warming up. And then also thinking about the last part of the course is a bit more technical, and you're going to be going through the dark. So, you know, thinking about all of those logistics as you're planning out your pacing strategy for the entire race.
Yeah, that's fantastic to bring up. On that first out and back, it's not crazy technical. There's some spots that, you know, you get those, some people call them baby boulders, where they're the size of like a softball, or, you know, like a little bit bigger, where, you know, like they're not solid enough to actually plant your foot on, but it looks like they are. So there's a couple sections where you got to be mindful of those, but for the most part, that out and back is going to be pretty dirt, pretty hard pack. Like, I don't think there's too much gravel. There's definitely a lot of grass in that section for sure. That's where the prairies are that everybody talks about. So yeah, it's definitely, as you come back through that second lollipop, that Rice Lake area, as you head south of 12, that's where it gets the most technical. And that's where it's, you know, for 90% of us, it's going to be dark. So I remember last year, like, you know, the sun was setting. It was getting dark. I forgot my headlamp because it was still at Highway 12. And you're sitting there and it's like, man, I'm rolling my ankles left and right here, just because you have rocks that are bigger than those baby boulders that you want to plant off of. But of course, after like 70 miles, your legs are just trash. So your ability to actually coordinate your foot striking a particular place is pretty diminished. So you're definitely more likely to trip and fall. So you really got to go into that section with a nice headlamp and with some energy left in the legs and the mind to command your body through that technicality for sure. So, and then that'll take us, let's see, we covered going up through Tamarack, Bluff, Horse Riders, Natalie's. Yeah, you can expect a lot of hills through there. McMiller's, pretty grassy. Wilton, Highway 67, for most of us, that's going to be the area that's really hot. If it's humid too, that humid just kind of sits in those prairies and it doesn't go anywhere. 67, that section too can get pretty brutal with minimal coverage. You go in and out of a few forests, a few trees there, but it's definitely pretty exposed. Scuppernong, although it's really hilly and a little bit technical, you're probably gonna incur the most river rock there, the most kind of gravelly type of stuff. It's pretty shaded, but again, it's just a lot of punchy climbs. So take that section, fairly easily, because that one can definitely trash out your legs before you even get back to Nordic. And then going out, you're going to hit Nordic again. So 100K, you're coming back through Tamarack, through Bluff, and then you go south on the Ice Age Trail through Duffin, through Highway 12, and then down to Rice Lake. And that's where it gets really technical. So I know that I used the Highway 12 drop bags last year. I know there's a couple other that you can have if you're going to be out there for longer than 24 hours or so. You want to have some batteries, or you want to have some backup lights in that section too, or in that drop bag, because you definitely don't want to be caught like in the dark. If you can too, you can buddy up with somebody or get in a conga line where if everybody else has lights, maybe you're not the only person that's stranded in the dark. But yeah, plan on that section being really, really dark. I do like to, somebody on Facebook mentioned, I can't remember who it was, but she mentioned that in the forest, it gets darker a lot quicker than, in the prairies. And that's such a key line of thinking because, a lot of the times at that time of year, it's going to be like 8:30, almost 9 o'clock by the time the sun actually sets. But in the forest, it's going to be dark a lot sooner. So plan accordingly for that. And then you come back up through Bluff, through Tamarack, and then you finish up at Nordic. So that's going to be the whole 100 mile there. I think the biggest crux part of that race is going to be right after Bluff. They call that Confusion Corner. It's a four-way or a five-way intersection, I believe, where you either go north, so you take a right onto the Ice Age Trail to go out to Scuppernong, or you take a very hard left. It's almost like a hairpin type of left to go south down towards Rice Lake. So I did repost on my Facebook a video that Sid actually made where he kind of walked everybody through with markings and everything. Like, hey, if you're running the 100 mile, this is where you turn this way your first time out. This is where you turn on your second time out. So they did a group run last week, and I think it was really key for anybody that went to that group run just to be able to get exposed to what Confusion Corner is actually going to look like and the turns that you have to make. At least, at least one person a year gets kind of confused or lost in that section or has to backtrack a bunch. So definitely go onto my Facebook and check out that page. I believe it's on the Kettle training page too. So I did see a couple other people reshared it. But that one is going to be key. If you can't get on course, then definitely check out that video.
And that's something that I like to recommend to my athletes when they are getting ready to run a race, partly for visualization, but also just to understand the course. There's a lot of videos out on YouTube of many of these races. So if you go in and do a search, you can look on YouTube and you can see different people who have posted their experience maybe at Kettle. Great way for you to get an idea, visualize, get a look at what the terrain is and the course is, from their view. I think that that's super helpful as well. So I like to do that personally before a race too, just so I can kind of get my head in the game and, think about everything that I'm going to see and feel, as I'm going through that course. So there's not as many surprises.
Yep. His handle is Crispy Dumpling on YouTube. His name is Chris. I don't know how to say his last name, but it starts with a P. He does an amazing job capturing the course and capturing just the aesthetic that the course has to offer. So you're going to go through ponderosa pines. You're going to go through, through needle beds. You're going to go through prairies and grasses. At that time of the year too, like the bugs shouldn't be super bad, but it will be buggy. There might be a couple chasing you. So be prepared for that too. But yeah, definitely check out his videos because you'll get a good idea of like what's going to be coming at you at different points in the race.
Yeah, super helpful.
Awesome. Cool. Well, that's pretty much the entire course. And like we were talking about before, like I think this course is going to favor somebody who can transition between hiking uphill, downhill, and on flats really efficiently. So one thing that I like to program with my athletes are these hikes where, you know, we'll do like little running intervals, but we don't really label it as a hike, just so that way we can practice transitioning between walking and running. A lot of times, what I've noticed in these long races is you get to the point where your legs are in hiking mode and they don't want to transition back into running mode, even though you're going downhill. So just knowing like, hey, what does my body need? So that way, like by the time I crest that hill, I can start to click over and go a little bit faster downhill. What does my body need to get to that point? And I also think too, it's pretty mental where, you know, like, you have to understand, like, do I want to start running up the hill just before I crest and go downhill? Or do I want to wait until I'm actually going downhill? One thing that I found with myself during the race last year, which probably wasn't a smart move, was that if I waited until I crested a hill and was going down to start running, that impact on my legs just did not feel good. And it was really hard to actually pick up like an efficient running stride downhill. So what I started doing was, you know, 10 to 15 steps or strides before the top of a hill, I would just start to slowly turn over because it's a lot easier on the body to run uphill than run downhill. And then by the time I crest the hill, my legs are already kind of ready to just turn over and float into the downhills for sure. So it's kind of like that nice warm up before the downhill comes.
Right. And you know, I really like to have athletes, you know, try to find, you know, trails to hit as much as possible, you know, planning for this race. And also kind of during their runs, usually it's the long run is when people are able to get to trails. They can't always get them, you know, through all the week or whatever, but even that once a week of a long run and practicing the run the way you're going to race it with power hiking hills that you come upon and running the downhills and flats, just so you're used to that, getting used to just kind of running some technical courses so that feels comfortable on race day as well.
Yep. I think mentally too, we got to practice being able to go from a stop at an aid station where we have resources, we have comfort, and then going to a start where you're kind of leaving and going back into, you know, like the woods or like the backcountry. Just because it's mentally fatiguing and it's physically fatiguing if you never practice, hey, what does my body feel like when I go from running 20 miles and then stopping for 5 minutes to refuel, rehydrate, talk to my crew, and then get going again, right? So you don't want that feeling to be novel on a race day. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty demoralizing. One thing that I've noticed is our bodies have like a very good ability to warm back up to an effort, even if it's kind of cooled down. So after 20 miles, after 40 miles, after 60 miles, if you have to stop to refuel, go to the bathroom, talk to your crew, do whatever, even if it's only a couple minutes, your first couple steps are not going to feel good, but don't let that demoralize you, because after a minute or two, you kind of click back into that rhythm. So practicing that by doing these walk run intervals, either on roads or on trails, or practicing it in your long runs is going to be perfect. And that's where I like to use the aid station car stop, you know, do a lap, stop at the car, you know, take 3 to 5 minutes to just refuel and then leave again, just to experience what is it mentally going to take for me to leave my comforts, leave, you know, my aid station, go back into the woods on legs that now are starting to kind of seize up, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's super hard to get moving. You're right. And I also think, you know, a great strategy on a course like this is doing some of your fueling and hydrating when you're going up the hills. You know, when you're moving a little slower, it's a little easier to get in and, you know, get what you're eating for nutrition and grab a sip and keep moving and not have to slow down too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's huge too, is just making more use out of that time where you're not going forwards as fast, you know, like, you know, I practiced going to the bathroom too while I'm hiking. just so that way, like, I don't have to take like a 0 stop, So that's something, if you're really into it, really die hard and not afraid to get a little messy, you can experiment with yourself. It's never clean the first time, but it can be refined. Or again, using those hike breaks, using those walk breaks to assess your body, fueling, hydration, all that. That's super key, Loretta.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And, I think, and a course like this, our weather may be hot, be thinking about that, be hydrating and fueling with electrolytes the following or the week coming in, so that you are topped off, as you go into this race, because especially if you're a heavy sweater, you want to be thinking about that. So you can avoid issues with dehydration and electrolyte issues, thinking about cooling techniques and starting them early before it's too late with, icing. You can wear an ice bandana, you can put ice in your hat, you can put ice in your sleeves, keeping that back of your neck and your wrists cool are going to help keep your core body temperature down. So thinking about that, I think, is super important to be ready for this race, because it may be hot on race day. I just want to make sure people are prepared for that. And then also, opposite of that is when the evening, depending on the day, the evening could cool and you may need some layers, right? So that's the way I always like to race, because when you're running a big 100-mile race, well, let's say it takes 30 hours, a lot can happen in the weather in 30 hours, and especially if you've been all hot and sweaty all day and you're kind of damp, then when that sun goes down and it cools, then you can get a little bit colder. So I think running sleeves are always great, or a very thin layer jacket that you can, throw on. Things that are really simple for you to transition, maybe can be stuffed in a pack or in your drop bag, I think is really helpful to have out there, because nothing is worse than being too hot or too cold. So anything you can do to help mitigate that is going to help save you energy as well.
Yep. And just a reminder too, anything that goes in your drop bag doesn't have to be worn on your person, but as long as you have that option too, when you come through, to say, okay, cool, at Highway 12, I have gloves and I have whatever, but do I need them? No, like I'm okay. That's better than, not having it, but needing it terribly. And yeah, I mean, like, colder temperatures feel way colder, especially after a full day of exertion, right? You're out in the sun all day. You kind of get beat up. You're in 80, 85 degree weather. And then all of a sudden, maybe it only cools down to like 50, but that 50 can feel ice cold, especially if you're wet. So that's huge, Loretta. And I think for anybody that attended that group run this past Sunday, they definitely get a leg up on the competition compared to everybody else, or, just being exposed to the heat, because that was really our first, upper 70s, low 80s degree day in probably a month. I mean, we had that weird week where we had a couple 80-degree days, but it was long enough ago now to not really get like a bump in heat training from it, right? So it was great to be out there on the course experiencing what is Confusion Corner going to look like, especially when you're super hot and when you're overheating, right? Because the heat is going to slow everybody down. The heat's going to make everybody drink more. The heat's going to mean that you're going to have to take in more electrolytes too. So if that's something that you haven't been exposed to all year, like definitely try to get in a couple sessions during the middle of the day when it's in, 80-degree temps. I would say plan for hotter weather as opposed to colder weather, because at least like if you plan for hotter weather, maybe you hit the sauna and whatnot. If cold weather does come, you're going to be way more prepared for that cold weather then. If the hot weather comes, hey, you're kind of exposed to it,
Right. And I think another thing I like to have athletes do preparing for a race is to try to get in a night run or two, or early morning, so it's dark. So you know what to expect on the trails and how it feels in the darkness versus in the daylight. So I think that, that definitely slows your pace down a little bit and changes things too. So getting any of those things that can be race specific into your training is super helpful.
Yeah, let alone the fact that like after you've been staring at this little circle of light for a couple hours down the trail, like just knowing what to expect or how your mind is going to take it, like, after you're wearing a headlamp for 4 or 5 hours, things get a little spacey. I know, like if I wear one for too long, it's like, man, I feel like I'm looking at everything and nothing, and I can't really see the depth of whatever. So definitely train with your lights. I know some people wear those waist lights and then a headlamp, and that can kind of give you a better like depth perception. But yeah, that's great. I mean, like, get some practice in at night, because man, even if you're like one of the fastest runners out there, like you're going to spend some time in the evening. That's for sure.
Right. And the other thing some of my athletes have done in the past, I've coached several athletes that have ran Kettle, and some of them really like to have some trekking poles towards the end of the race in the last like 20 miles. So if that's something that you're thinking of, be practicing it, so that they're efficient for you. Because if you go out there and not practice, they're going to be more cumbersome than helpful, I think.
Absolutely.
And,
So
I was going to say too, I've coached athletes that have, finished at all different paces here at Kettle. So even, an athlete that has ran 18 hours at Kettle is doing power hiking, from the beginning of the race. It's not something even started later. It's those hills and, really respecting those hills. People that are finishing at 30 hours, power hiking at the beginning of the race, so there's a lot of similar strategies, maybe different paces. But, so you can achieve an 18-hour power hiking or a 30-hour power hiking, so there's that big range in between. So it's not, don't feel discouraged if that's what your plan is, because you can still do great and have a great time, whatever, your goal is.
Yeah, not letting the power hiking kind of scare you is going to be huge, just because, again, that mental piece of like, knowing that you're going to be out there for hours and hours and hours on end. So how do you even treat the first 8 hours of exertion, right? Like, it should be easy enough at the point, like after 8 hours, where, like you still feel like you could run up those hills, right? Like a lot of people will tell you, like, you want to get to mile 50 feeling fairly fresh. Well, how do you do that? It's you slow down a lot on the first half, and you really respect keeping up on fueling, keeping up on hydration, being ahead of it. So that way you don't get to that point where you're kind of like bonked out, like stumbling, wondering if you're on the trail or whatnot. So if you can get to mile like 50 and get at least most of the way through the heat of the day, feeling good, feeling nourished, not having any like too big aches and pains. Of course, after 50 miles, everybody's going to be feeling it, right? But as long as you don't turn any ankles or break anything, like, if it's typical running related soreness, then like, hey, I consider that pretty fresh. If you got clear thinking,
I agree.
if you can still keep moving.
Yeah. And that's definitely my goal in every 100 is to try to hit 50 feeling fresh. It sounds crazy, but it is really something that we can all strive for. No matter what your pace is, it's just smart racing is going to get you there. Fueling and hydrating, cooling, or if you need to stay warm, keeping all of those things in check are going to get you to 50 feeling fresh, being smart about your race, not going out too fast, pacing yourself and all of those pieces is what's going to get you there. What's not going to get you there feeling fresh is going out too fast, disregarding your plan that you went into the race with, that you were all set with, and going, oh, I feel so great, I could run this pace all day. And now you're going too fast and you decided to run the hills because you felt good, so avoid those temptations, because they're real and they will pull you in. And then also, like, oh, I can skip this water break or I can skip this food. You can't. You need to stay on it from the very beginning. I really feel strongly about, as soon as I start, the race says go, I start sipping on my hydration and eating like an IV drip, trying to keep it consistent the whole race. Those are my best races. If I throw that out the window, then that's where I'm going to start hitting lows really early on, and I'm going to struggle, and I'm not going to feel fresh at 50.
Yeah, that's awesome that you said that, because that's something that's in my mind too, is that like, you got to be drinking before you're thirsty. You have to be eating before you're hungry, because you want to stay ahead of that curve. But what does that actually mean? Like, some people say like, oh, drink before you're thirsty. Does that mean like I guzzle 16 ounces in the first 20 minutes of a race? Like, no, that means, like every time, like for me personally, every time I have a thought about water, I just take a little, like 1 or 2 ounces, just kind of wet the whistle, right? Most of the time that has carbohydrates in it too, because I try to keep at least some sort of calories in my bottle. So that way, every time I drink, I'm getting a little bit of energy too. And every time I think about food, I don't like slam a gel, but maybe I rip the top off and I carry that thing with me for a couple miles. I think it was at Earth Day. I carried a half-eaten gel for most of the last lap, because I was like, well, if there's any possible chance that I could slurp something down so I can get a good finishing kick and finish with good energy, I'm going to do it, and I just couldn't. I could only take in liquid calories. But I know last year at Kettle, I had a couple goos, I believe. And it's like, man, you just rip them off. And like, every time I would think about that goo in my hand, I just take a little nibble, take a little bit, because nothing's worse than going up a hill, huffing and puffing, slamming an entire gel, having all of that gunk in your mouth all at once, and then you get that super big energy surge. And then 15 minutes later, it's like, you're kind of back down. So, whether that's thoughts about like, oh, like, look at that pretty lake. Oh, water. Okay. Just tiny little sip, you know, or like, man, I'm sweating a lot. Okay. Water, tiny little sip,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. I
Um,
also like to have a reminder on my watch. That helps me because I sometimes get out of check with, drinking like, oh, I'm not thirsty, and then it's too late. So, having a 15-minute timer helps me keep myself in check. Like, okay, I guess I have to drink now, whether I want to or not, it's time. So, so I think
yeah.
that's good. So one of the questions that was put out there was about shoes. Reese, you've ran the course. Actually, you were first overall male last year. Woohoo! At your first 100. So what would you recommend for shoes? Same shoes all day? Would you change shoes at some point? What kind of shoes?
That all comes down to personal preference and what type of athlete you are for sure. I can speak like broadly in terms of principle and what the course is going to throw at you, but then the rest is your decision for sure, because everybody's going to have different shoe preferences, right? So I would definitely say like a trail shoe more than a road shoe. Absolutely. Something with a little bit of lug. You don't have to have something that's like a Solomon Speed Cross with lugs that are like, a centimeter long. You don't need something that aggressive, but you do need a little bit of something, especially if there's some water there. I know last year it was a fairly dry week leading up to it, and we didn't have any rain the day of. Maybe like a little mist here and there, but there's some parts of the Ice Age Trail that don't completely dry out. There's always going to be something where you might have to step in a little bit of mud that just kind of sinks in a little bit. But if it's raining, like it's going to be a mud fest out there for sure. So that's where, like definitely something with a little bit of lug. And that's something that you got to be training with too in practice. So I guess my smart ass answer would be like anything you're training with, like use
Right.
anything that you're training with right now. I wouldn't say like there's any need to go out and buy a shoe and only put in like 20 miles in it and then try to race a 100-miler in it. I would much rather have somebody run a shoe that they know they're not going to get hot spots in. They know that they have some amount of traction on the trail. And if you do have to put other shoes in a drop bag, I say that's great. It gives you options. It gives you something to think about when you're on the trail, right? If you wanted to put something in with more lugs or something that's a half a size bigger in case your feet swell, go for it for sure. Me personally, I usually tend to stick with the same pair of shoes the entire time. I've done a lot of like foot strengthening exercises. I go for a lot of barefoot walks and stuff like that. And I train in the shoes that I plan to race in. So I'll occasionally get blisters on my toes here and there, but they're never the defining factor of my race. So I think to myself, like, if I can avoid taking the time to switch my shoes, like I will for sure, but it's going to change every race. So that's where you got to ask yourself, what are your personal preferences?
Absolutely. Same for me. I usually stick with the same shoes for an entire 100, or if I'm doing a 24-hour event. I feel like if something is working, I'm not going to change it. Same, I'm going to keep things as same as possible. So that's my thing too. So we're thinking about another question, and okay, we've got the 100K temptation to drop. So, how do you handle that? Myself, I run a lot of looped courses. I run track courses. I've run out and backs. I've run also, point to points, but that temptation doesn't necessarily get me so much because I know that's good to be expected. And so I think going into the race, realizing that's there, but it's not an option, right? It's there, and maybe your car's near, it's still not an option because you went in with the goal of to finish. If you're finishing the 100, you went into goal to finish the 100. You're in under cutoff at that 100K. It's not an option. You're going to keep going. You're going to keep going as far as you can, right? And as long as everything is going well for you. So, if I run 24 hours on the track, I'm passing my crew every 400 meters, but it's not an option to stop because that's not my goal. My goal is to keep going for 24 hours or to the 100-mile mark or, whatever my goal is that day. So I think sticking to your goal, sticking to your why, even when it feels tempting, that's not what you came for, right? So go for what you came for.
Absolutely. I think too that, visualization is going to be huge in practice and in preparation. I think me personally, sometimes like I'm running down my typical, 10-mile loop around my house or, maybe my 10-mile loop around the trails or whatever. And, sometimes I would say 70% of the time I'm really engaged with the terrain and the environment and how I'm feeling. And then there's 30% of the time where I'm thinking to myself, okay, just put myself inside my own shoes right now at Kettle and visualize tricky parts of the course. we all have those runs where even if it's our standard like go-to run or go-to route, some days we just don't feel good. And those days where I don't feel good, I think about, okay, in my next race, where can I potentially not feel good? And how can I kind of practice just getting out of it, right? So I think too, using life as a mental preparation tool for ultra running is going to be huge. I just, last week, 2 weeks ago was moving, and the mantra the entire day was, I'd rather be running an ultra. Like moving is tough. It's hard. It's physically laborious, but so is ultra running, and I'd rather be running an ultra, So I know that that's going to get me through a lot of the tough sections of Kettle. One particular thing for the specific 100K mark that I've been thinking about the past couple of days after getting this question was, when you practice your aid station efficiency and you just treat each aid station the same, it's like, it can't even cross your mind that this is an option to drop, right? You might be thinking it in the time being. Last year, I don't really think I thought about dropping until after the 100K mark. And then by that time, it's like, well, I'm already here. Like, there is no drop down.
Gone too far, no turning back.
So what I particularly started doing was a heat training protocol. So I go out for my runs, and then I end up at the gym, which is only about a mile away from my house. I sit in the sauna for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then I run a mile back home. And it's not comfortable. It's not relaxing being in a sauna. It's not like, the first 5 minutes are like, oh, this feels good to stop running and just kind of sit down. But then afterwards, your heart rate starts to kind of creep up. You start to get these physiological responses of stress because your body is just in an environment that it's not used to being in. And that's where I sat down, I got a good posture, I closed my eyes, and I visualized, what is it going to be like to hit that last, 400 meters coming into the aid station, seeing the banner, hearing the music, looking at Michelle and Sid like last year as they cheer you in, knowing that, hey, I got to cross that line. I have to grab some fuel and hydration, and then I got to get back. I got to get going. Like, it's this hard feeling of, you already put in a ton of effort through the day, but there's still a lot of effort to go, right? So I just sat down and I visualized, okay, this is what my mind is going to incur at that point of the race. And this is how I'm going to handle it. I'm going to acknowledge those thoughts. They're going to want to go in. Every hard race I've ever done, I've thought about dropping at some point, just because when you're pushing yourself, things aren't pretty, right? Like, when you're pushing yourself, emotions are going to come up, good emotions, bad emotions, dropping emotions, DNF, whatever it is. But you got to think, okay, how in this stressful environment, and stressful just meaning like it's a taxation on your body, how am I going to recognize these thoughts and just let them pass so I can keep going on my original objective? So I think the visualization, whenever you can during training, for this particular listener that asked the question, like, I would say, on your next run, when it gets hard, on your next long run, when you're 18 miles in, you're like, shoot, man, like, I'm so close to the end. Just think about crossing that 100K mark and thinking about how you're going to have to end up leaving that safety net of dropping down and still getting a good 100K time to go out and put another 40 miles of effort in.
Yeah.
So
I completely agree. Visualization is a huge piece that I use as well. And I also do the same thing you do, like, especially when I'm struggling in a run, I think, okay, this is how I'm going to, so mile 80 seems to be my nemesis. So this is how I'm going to feel at my mile 80. And this is how I'm going to get through. Am I going to stop in my training run, or am I going to push through so I can get to that 100-mile mark? And that's kind of the way I also work it. And I also like to do training runs, like you said, with my car parked there. And I do a lot of loops, because I do a lot of looped courses. And so I need to be prepared for how am I going to fuel and how am I going to get back out there? And there's times when I'm doing, a loop that's 2 miles and I'm doing 25 miles on it that day, that I want to say, my car's right here. It's really hot and I'm at mile 20. I can just go home, but I don't. That's when I have to think about, how am I going to push through at mile 80? Am I going to stop? And then I also have to think, how am I going to feel if I walk away right now? If I walk away at this point, how am I going to feel tomorrow, about where I am? So I think there's obviously times when we are going to drop or DNF because we are injured, or, there's something going on with our health. That's a whole different thing. When it's just more of a mental piece, we've got to figure out a way to keep going, keep pushing through, because we know when we sign up for an ultra, it's never easy, right? And that's why we do these things, is because it's so hard and we want to challenge ourselves to get to the finish line. So, think about that when you get get to that point, I think, so that you can get yourself through.
Yep. And I want to add the caveat too, as long as it's safe to do so. Like I'm
Yes.
by no means like a death before DNF kind of guy.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, like I dropped out of Wasatch last year because I truly didn't believe it would have been safe for me to do so. I was getting kind of loopy. I was tripping over everything I would never trip over in a million years. The heat, the altitude got to me. It was getting dark. I was like, I can't even trust myself in these mountains at nighttime in the condition that I'm in. So I can't ask the race organization to be reliable and accountable for me and my decisions of going out there knowing that like I'm in a really rough spot right now. So in that case, I dropped, but that was more of a, you know, you take 30 minutes to assess like, hey, like, why am I doing this? Am I dropping because it's physically hard and because my legs hurt and all those issues that you're going to pop up in that are going to pop up in any ultra? Or is it a safety thing? Is it like you twisted your ankle? Is it you think you might have broken something or torn something or popped something and you haven't been moving right for the past 30 miles or whatever it is? That's a completely different story. But I do also live by the mantra, bad mood, eat food. Especially just for when we're running. This isn't like lifestyle advice, right? But bad mood, eat food. I know like in my heart of hearts, like I love being outside and pushing myself so much that if I'm ever like, why am I out here right now? Like this sucks. Like I want to drop. Everything hurts, but I'm not injured, you know? If I get into those lines of thinking, it's mostly because I'm like low on calories or I'm low on hydration. So if you get into that 100K feeling that way, you know, maybe it's just because you haven't been fueling right. So maybe before the 100K even hits, let's say by the time you, what aid station is it? I already forgot. By the time you hit Tamarack, which is probably what, like away from Nordic, by the time you hit that aid station, maybe you're putting in the calories, maybe you're putting in the hydration. So that way, when you get to Nordic, you feel good and you don't feel like I'm dragging here, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's good. I mean, that's a big thing that I talk to athletes about is if you're starting to get some deep lows, you really need to check your nutrition because most likely you are low on nutrition. You need calories. You may not feel like it, but you do. And also, you know, if you do get to that point of feeling a low and feeling like you want to drop, give yourself some time. You know, you have 30 hours to finish this race. Give yourself a few minutes to take in some fuel, take in some hydration, and let your mind reset a little bit. I feel like sometimes when we're conquering some of these big events like this is that we mentally start to freak out and then it causes that DNF that may not be necessary, right? So just take a breather, get yourself back together and try to go, you know, and if it's not an injury issue, it's just more of a mental thing, say, okay, I'm going to just go to the next aid station. And maybe that's how you get through the rest of the race is I'm just going to run to the next aid station and, you know, kind of break it apart like that so that you can get through rather than looking at the enormity of, I have 40 miles left, you know?
Oh my God. You know, that's amazing. If anybody here has auto lap on their watch set to 1 mile, I highly encourage you to silence it or turn it off because if you have that thing beeping in your ear every single mile, it is going to drive you nuts. When I make splits for myself for races, like especially for like Kettle for the 100 miler, I go, okay, what's my average pace? Therefore, at this aid station, what time do I want to be there at? So I go by time splits, but I only have 5 splits for the entire day that I'm going to be focusing on. I'm not going to be focused, and that's 20-mile increments, you know? I'm not going to be focusing mile after mile. I try not to even focus aid station after aid station because there's some of them personally that I'm going to go through because I know the next one is like 3 miles away. But that's my strategy. But if you are so hyper focused on mile. Oh no, this mile was, 15 minutes a mile and I need to be running at 14 minutes a mile to hit my goal. Like you don't want that stuff stressing you out because the entire daily average is going to take into account like your highs where you're running 11 minutes a mile, your lows where you're kicking can at 18 or 20 minutes a mile, or where you're just stopped altogether, So you can't hyper focus on one particular portion of the race. But you just like, as I'm running, I always think to myself, check in with my effort. How's my breathing? How's my hydration? How's my fueling? If I'm low on fueling, kind of like we talked before, bad mood, eat food. that doesn't mean like, okay, slam a couple gels or like stuff a big burrito in my mouth. That means like, okay, maybe I take a gel at my regular interval and then I open up another gel and then I just slowly sip on that to make up the difference until I get back to a spot where I'm like, yeah, like I don't feel hungry. I don't have that mental fog. I have like good clarity. That doesn't mean slam a bunch of stuff because your stomach's probably not going to be able to handle it for sure. And if you do that multiple times per day, it's just going to be a stress on the stomach where it's like, hey, like I'm kind of over getting these big boluses of ingestion, you know?
Right. So I think we pretty much covered everything, but I want to say the website is amazing. It has a lot of information in there. You can see what the course looks like. And also really, especially if you're chasing cutoff, especially look at that. There's some different cutoffs at aid stations. So you're aware the overall cutoff is 30 hours, but there are some cutoffs, hard cutoffs at aid stations coming in. So you want to know what those are. So you're making sure that you're making those too, so you can finish under cutoff. So just, I think something to look at is, you know, just to have for your knowledge of like, okay, I know I need to be into this aid station by X time to make it.
Yep, absolutely. And two, Crispy Dumplings video on the 2022 Kettle Moraine is actually on the website too. So it's fantastic. Go check it out and
Nice.
Get excited.
Yeah. So, you know, I have some athletes that are going to be at Kettle. Reese will be at Kettle. So we're excited. I will be trekking feverishly from home to see how things are going and following people. So we hope everyone really enjoys the experience. It's on June 10th. Hopefully it's going to be a great day for everyone.
Absolutely. This was the Dirt Trail Running Podcast Coaches Edition, where we drink coffee, talk about training, races coming up. We like to spread kindness through community with all of our events and all of our coaching and whatnot. So hopefully you guys got some good takeaways. And if you have any questions, hit us up in the comments, share this podcast. Let us know what you think about it. Let us know if there's something we missed. Let's have a discussion in the comments and make everybody faster and ensure everybody gets to the finish line.
Excellent. Have a great day.
Take care.